highlight a few things on these notes. On this handout, who are the bureaucrats? It just gives you some information that you can actually read yourself. Excuse me, I'm not going to spend any time reading that to you. I do want to highlight a few things. This idea of employees of the bureaucracy being civil servants. They are organized under a merit system. They are hired and promoted based on the experience and qualifications that they have, or some sort of test that they have to use or take. It's no longer based on a system that's called patronage. The president does appoint a lot of officials in the government, and at one point we had what was called the spoils system or patronage, and a lot of jobs in the bureaucracy were given to people in exchange for their support of the president during his campaign, whether that be financially, whatever that looks like. So the spoils system or patronage kind of was coined during Andrew Jackson's presidency, where he was giving jobs in the bureaucracy in exchange for people supporting his candidacy for president. Very few jobs that the president gets to appoint. Let me say that again. There are a lot fewer jobs now, so we have a lot fewer positions that the president gives out in exchange for their support. You might see ambassadors, and you could see some cabinet level officials too, but most of your everyday average civil servant employee who works for the bureaucracy, they are hired based on the merit system. Again, this idea that we're hiring them based on their actual experience and qualification, and advancing them on some tests that they've taken, not having anything to do with their loyalty to the political party. And the only other thing that I want to say on this, other than, again, know what these things are on here, is this idea of your average bureaucrat. You know, we've got like 4 million, including the military people who work for the federal government. And most of them have the term that you might see used as continuity of service. So when there is a change of administration, when you have a new president come in, these people aren't fired. So we don't fire 4 million employees in the federal bureaucracy when we have a Democratic president leave and a Republican president come in. Your average worker in the bureaucracy stays there, and there is this continuity of service from administration to administration. And the budget for each one of these departments is usually based on the budget from the year before. So that's all I want to say about that handout. I apologize if this is sideways, but I didn't want to go back and redo that. But you just go ahead and take a look at your handout. A couple things that I want to highlight from this. Oversight of the federal bureaucracy. Again, I'm not going to read everything in here. You can see what the president's oversight function and the check that the president has on the bureaucracy. The last bullet point under the president, where it says reduce an agency's budget. Typically what happens is the president looks at the previous year's budget for whatever agency that he's looking at, and they just go off that. And if they don't give them the same, a lot of times they expand that, and that is through the Office of Management and Budget. Once Congress, remember Congress has the purse strings, so once Congress has appropriated money for these agencies, the president doesn't have a choice, he must spend them. The president cannot impound funds. That has been determined to be unconstitutional. Under oversight that Congress has, again, that second one emphasizing this idea of cutting or reducing the funds to that particular agency. They have the purse strings, and so the congressional office dealing with the budget is the Congressional Budget Office. So the executive is the Office of Management and Budget, and the agency within the legislature is the Congressional Budget Office. Um, One other thing I want you to add to this list is that idea of oversight. And so you will see Congress bringing members from each one of these departments or the agencies and making them testify. What are you doing? How are you spending the money? If they feel like they're doing something wrong, that they can call them in and make them answer to Congress. And the reason that I say that is because these executive agencies are created by Congress. The executive branch does not create these agencies. The powers that these bureaucratic agencies have come from Congress. That term delegated authority, sometimes also referred to as discretional authority. Congress creates these agencies, and then they hire people through the merit system who are experts in these fields, and so they pretty much turn over all the authority to these agencies, who sometimes act as legislative. They make the rules and regulations that everyone has to follow. They interpret that, they enforce that, and so a lot of these agencies have all three of the lawmaking, executive, and then either punishing, determining whether these have been violated, and so it kind of goes against the idea of checks and balances and separation of powers when you put all of that power into one of these particular agencies. One other thing I want to mention is the legislative veto. I'm sorry, I keep coughing. Legislative veto, which has been ruled unconstitutional. So Congress makes a law, turns it over to the president to give it to the appropriate executive agency to enforce that particular law, and the legislative veto allowed Congress to go back after the fact and veto portions of what the executive branch was doing in order to enforce that. So that legislative veto, they don't have the power to do that. What they do have the power to do is go back and rewrite legislation and take some of that power away. So they can go back and rewrite the legislation, but that would have to go through that whole entire lawmaking process to get there. And then you can read federal courts, and then thinking critically, you can go ahead and look at that. This is just a demographics of the federal employee. More men than women, typically more white men. Just again, these are professional white collar. This has changed over time, but it's still predominantly a lot of white men. But like, again, some of these demographics are starting to change a little bit. And again, I apologize. This is on its side. This is the organizational chart for the whole entire federal bureaucracy. Notice at the top is the president, then underneath here you have the 15 cabinet level positions, and then underneath that you have the regulatory agencies, the independent executive agencies, and the government corporations. So remember, as you're going through and trying to determine which one is which, you're going to rule out, is it one of these departments or one of these cabinet agencies? Does it regulate something? So the Federal Communications Commission, they regulate what's going out over the airwaves. Or is it charging for its service, the United States Post Office? If you want to send something through the mail, you have to buy a stamp. So if it's not a cabinet level position, if it's not regulating something and they're not selling you something, it's one of those independent executive agencies. An example would be like NASA, and I'll give you a few more examples of that here in a moment. So I'm going to leave that there. This right here is the organizational chart for just Homeland Security. So what you need to understand is not only is the whole entire federal government a bureaucracy, but then when we go and look at each one of these individual departments, each one of those departments are also basically its own bureaucracy. There is a hierarchy of authority. You have the department head, the secretary, whatever. You have job specialization. Each one of them have their own defined duties. There is a division of labor, and then there are formal rules that must be followed. So when you're looking at, what defines a bureaucracy, It's those principles. Those at the top have authority over those below. So you have this secretary, and then each one of these that fall below and below have to answer to the person above them. Each one of them specialize in their own particular areas, and there are formal rules that you have to follow. All right, so we have cabinet department, independent executive agencies, regulatory commissions, and then government corporations. One of the things about a cabinet level position, they are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. The president can fire them. So their job, they serve at the pleasure of the president. If they're not doing what they want, or if they're not doing and enforcing things the way the president wants them to do, they can fire them. And so you might ask yourself, why would the president want to fire one of these people? And I'm looking for my notes here. I had something written down, so give me just a second. Oh, here it is. Why would they fire them? Okay, so what happens is Secretary of Defense and the president might not always be on the same page in how they want something to run. And so they might actually have more loyalty to their department, the Defense Department or the State Department or the Veterans Affairs Department or Homeland Security. They might actually have more loyalty to the department than they do to the agenda that the president is trying to put forth. Their job is to actually enforce the policies that the president implements, but sometimes these contradict and the president might feel it's necessary to fire them. Sometimes you get interest groups that get involved in this and push for them to be dismissed. And you have to remember, who established these departments to begin with? Congress did. So there might be some dual loyalty. You know, should we do what Congress wants us to do, or should we enforce the laws that the president wants us to? Because remember, again, I'm just repeating myself, Congress is the one who creates these departments and authorizes them this discretionary authority, and this is how you should do your job. But then again, the person who hired them and chose them for that particular job is the President of the United States. Yeah, I think that's it on that. Independent executive agencies, there's some examples there. You've got Social Security. Social Security doesn't regulate anything. They're not one of the cabinet members, and they're not selling anything. NASA, again, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the EPA, not selling anything, not regulating anything, and not a cabinet level position. Your regulatory agencies, and I'm going to give you a list of those just to kind of make yourself aware of what those different ones are. So let's look at the regulatory agencies. The president gets to appoint them. They serve for a fixed amount of time. They serve for a term. The president cannot fire these regulatory leaders of these regulatory agencies. So when you think of the Federal Reserve, the Fed, once they are appointed, they need to be free to do their jobs without politics being involved in that. So the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who determines interest rates, they don't want the president to be manipulating interest rates to benefit them. And so once these people are put into office, they can't be replaced until their term has run out. And a term that I want you to write down with this Independent Regulatory Commission is this idea of administrative law. If it's regulating something, these administrative laws are the rules and regulations that these regulatory agencies are establishing. And let me see. The size of the government, if we go back, I'm not going back, but when we start looking at all of the different agencies, a lot of times we see the increase in these around wars. I wanted to add that. I'm trying to go through my notes and make sure that everything that I know I've seen on tests are going to be on here. People in the bureaucracy, because they work for government, tend to have a more positive view of the government. They tend to hold more liberal views. They trust government more, so they tend to vote for Democrats. So I've seen that information on there. Okay, I think, yeah.